although one is pure of thoughts and in heart, searches for the gates of the truly dead. You never know when the November winds blow, if the cursed gates are searching for you too. If you enter the gates backwards, you might have a small chance to flee with your life and all intact. But if your motives are untrue, then the living death calls your name, then there is nothing you can do. Marie Laveau, rest in peace. Tonight on the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast, I invite you to join me on another trip through the forgotten times and places, a look inside the New Orleans cemeteries of past, their lore and history as well as stories to be shared and preserved, timeless through infinity. I am your host, Ryan McKern. Thank you again for joining me in Wicked Webs We Weave. We begin tonight's tale with the story of Garage Street Cemetery, the most infamously known grounds of departed souls in the former home of the integrated Garage Street Cemetery. Once a sight to see, with its multi-tiered tombs, unfortunately it eventually fell prey to despair and was disestablished in the year of 1957, and the ghastly decision was made to do the unthinkable, to move the skeletal remains to other cemeteries. Every skull, tibia, femur were thought to have been gathered, segregated, and rehomed to the Hope Mausoleum of New Orleans and the Providence Memorial Park of nearby Metairie. But when ground was broken in 1871 for the site of the upcoming Superdome, it wasn't long before bones were unearthed, and there was plenty more that followed. Building a stadium on or near an old cemetery had the team doomed from the start. According to the source NOLA.com, I never got into the curse, Archie Manning would say, the legendary New Orleans Saints quarterback. The man who was the only hope for the Saints fans for years of paper bag wearing Aints games, believed to be the work of the curse that was brought on by the disturbed souls of the Garage Street Cemetery. Maybe I was always too busy, or somebody was hitting me in the mouth or something. Maybe there is something to it, Archie reflected on the curse. Despite the curse of the dome, that plagued the Saints for decades, the Superdome wasn't actually built upon the site of Garage Street Cemetery. In reality, it was a parking garage next to the dome that was the designee of the most unfavorable destination and distinction. But that hardly seems to sway believers of the curse, and they believe the force was reawakened, or, judging by the incredible misfortune the team has experienced since its Super Bowl victory, the issues in and out of the dome such as Bountygate, Sean Payton's year suspension, and so forth. The mysteries and fortunate incidents and the curse lore continues. But it does not seem to be limited to the Saints alone. That Super Bowl that would be hosted in New Orleans suffered a blackout as well. And of course, Hurricane Katrina. When I'm here alone, I often think about Katrina, said Doug Thornton, the executive vice president of stadiums and arenas. I try to forget about the Super Bowl blackout. With Katrina, I'm amazed we didn't lose more lives, given the circumstance. No running water, very little food, running on generated power for 7 days. He went on to add, the power outage was a totally different thing. It was sudden. I won't give you an analogy of an earthquake. There are parts when I look back on it, it's hard to explain. Just ask any New Orleanian, and they'll tell you the spirits of the Garage Street Cemetery that haunt the Superdome are responsible for strange happenings that occur, and the building a stadium on or near an old cemetery had the team doomed from the start. Whether superstition or tales to be on is quite fascinating to read, and the Garage Street Cemetery still lives on in our memories and stories like these. The St. Peter Street Cemetery served as the city of New Orleans' primary burial ground through most of the colonial era, from 1724 and possibly earlier, until 1789 when it was officially replaced by St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. It still appears to have been occasionally used in the 1790s, particularly when flooding made it difficult to access the new cemetery. The St. Peter Street burial ground was utilized by segments of New Orleans and the societies in the colonial era, or at least by anyone who was baptized as Catholic, including the early European settlers, native-born whites, Native Americans, and free people of color. Those who were enslaved were also buried on the St. Peter's site, including those of both African and Native American descent. A disappropriate number of the people whose remains have been recovered. Archaeology during the two efforts date appear to be of African descent, and at least some of the show signs of mixed Native American ancestry. At this point, there is no way of knowing if this is because the cemetery was spatially segregated or if it was due to some other factor. It is also likely that at least some of the individuals were enslaved in life, something that may have been indicated by the pathologies suggestive of the shackling of one individual's ankle. Healed fractures produced by the forearm is used to ward off blows as etiological signs of heavy physical labor and dietary stress. While we will likely never be able to link specific sets of human remains to individuals in the records, there are interesting stories that emerge from both sources. The St. Peter Street Cemetery made news again in 2011, when a man by the name of Vincent Marcello had just begun the process of having a pool installed in the backyard of his French Quarter home. When the digging unearthed 15 bodies. But this wasn't the work of late notorious crime boss Carlos Marcello. This was a discovery of the lost St. Peter Street Cemetery. It doesn't bother at all, Marcello responded, when asked by a reporter if he was squeamish about the event. But if you go to the church in St. Louis Cathedral, and you walk over the graves of archbishops and the priests, so it is no big deal. On another occasion, Marcello added, "It's all part of the New Orleans culture. I think thee and the neighboring residents might even like it." The area where the coffins were found was once the Smoky Row section, the predecessor of Storyville. The prostitutes were known to kidnap men, snatch them from the street, haul them inside, then take their belongings and even murder them, depositing their bodies in the yards of their brothels. And one of the reasons the back-end French quarters is considered to be haunted. The forgotten souls of St. Peter Street Cemetery just might be the reason for all the paranormal phenomena. Holt Cemetery and Locust Grove Cemetery. New Orleans is also home to numerous potter's fields, cemeteries designed strictly for the city's poor. One of the better-known potter's fields is Holt Cemetery, named after Dr. Joseph Holt. The cemetery is located next to Delgado Community College, upriver from the French Quarter area. Students have been known to sometimes park around the cemetery, rolling around dice, whether the cops or come along and give them a ticket. In contrast to most of the cemeteries in New Orleans, Holt Cemetery is unique, and not just because it's one of New Orleans' few below-ground cemeteries. Instead, it's noted that for its style and hand-painted tombstones, wooden crosses, stuffed animals, dolls, and chairs, cluttered amidst the grave sites. At night, ghostly images have been spotted by those who have been brave enough to head out to the cemetery. And to those who have stayed out past midnight have even heard singing. But it could be the spirits of musicians Charles Buddy Bolden, Jewel, Babe, Stovall, Jesse Hill are putting on the best festive New Orleans has to offer. When what a festival of music that would be. Additionally, reports of orbs and light anomalies commonly spotted around the feeling that something is reaching out to those who visit. I've had the pleasure of visiting Holt Cemetery many times and viewed a procession. It was an entire family there. A few of them began digging the graves themselves, as this was a potter's grave and a grave for lower-income residents. I did notice the stuffed animals along grave sites and trees, the handmade tombstones, the trinkets, souvenirs. It was quite the sight to see. I highly recommend, if you are interested in the cemeteries at all, to visit Holt Cemetery. It's not mentioned in tourism at all by New Orleans, but it's historically something that you should definitely see. Holt Cemetery's predecessor, Locust Grove Cemetery, was established by New Orleans in the year of 1859. For the city's indigent, Locust Grove Cemetery No. 2 opened in 1877. Both cemeteries were shut down in 1879 and were later demolished in 1898. The Tommy Lafon School and Playground were built in their place. Building a playground on top of a graveyard is the makings of a true New Orleanian folktale. The school had to be rebuilt in 1905 after it was burnt down by the White Terrors. Almost half a century later, a new school building was constructed on the site in 1954, but suffered another tragedy as it was badly damaged by Hurricane Katrina. In 2011, the historic school was demolished itself, even though it was listed in the 2008 New Orleans 9 Most Endangered Sites by the Louisiana Landmark Society. Now the Housing Authority of New Orleans, the HANC, is planning to turn the vacant lot into a park, and with further development comes further disruptiveness for the restless that lie beneath the surface, forever haunting perhaps the turbulent grounds. For more information on Locust Grove Cemetery, please see my previous episode covering both 1 and 2 of Locust Grove and the history. Charity Hospital's Potterfield Cemetery. In 1848, Charity Hospital purchased another Pottersfield, another site for the city's unclaimed, including those who died from the yellow fever and influenza epidemics. The incredible number of dead made it necessary to place like Charity Hospital needed to open up a new cemetery, like Holt Cemetery. This was also one of the few graveyards in which bodies were buried underground, leaving those restless souls perhaps to linger in Pottersfield. Despite one of the city's largest cemeteries, Charity Hospital Cemetery is the least known of its contemporaries. Although in its existence it's lesser known today, this hasn't stopped people from visiting the grounds. Countless people have reported a deep feeling of sadness while walking through the cemetery, perhaps the same emotion that those unfortunate victims had befell all those years ago. Other visitors have even seen ghostly shapes dressed in hospital gowns, strolling through the grounds, sometimes even running into the street and startling pedestrians, causing motorists to slam on the brakes. End of the night, the graveyard sounds like the inside of a hospital, wailing moans, rickety gurneys all around. The site is now a memorial for the victims of Hurricane Katrina, taking up nearly half of the grounds, with only the back of the cemetery remaining untouched. More information on the Charity Hospital Cemetery Hurricane Katrina Memorial is included in a separate episode of the Wicked Webs We Weep podcast. On St. John's Bayou, New Orleans. A poem by John Laveau. Published on allpoetry.com. The night 75 years ago, I found love. Her waters known, the lost pirates have washed the feet of many slaves, cleansed blood from many and conflict endured earth's calms and storms. History's been a very mixed friend, but now life's been graced with peace. She's thanked by grand old mansions. Her oak root deep in history's cell, this morning finds her wandering under the spell of fiery moon with gentle band of hearts. We stride for 2 loves have met at last. It's among poetry that step by step is serenaded by the bayou's flow, for the one I love in this place I love have found me here with willing heart. From the defunct and forgotten to the lost, Bayou St. John Cemetery, also known by various other names, including Bayou St. John Cemetery with Jean Franchement, the City Cemetery, the First Municipal Cemetery, the New Cemetery, and even Pottersfield. It is a cemetery whose location remains uncertain even to historians. Some suspect the Lost Cemetery's location is close to the intersection of Bayou St. John and the Carondelet Canal. The Old Basin Council opposed to the previous believed location, near the area around Esplanade Avenue. The need for this new cemetery was great after the yellow fever epidemic in 1832, followed by another in 1833, where in 1 month alone reported thousands of people died. St. Louis Cemetery No. 2 quickly ran out of space for new souls, which led to the city's council authorizing an ordinance in 1835 that required the people who died in New Orleans or in nearby areas to be buried on the land next to the Bayou St. John that was purchased from Everest Blanc. With the distance being over a mile, the realization of the next transportation became abundantly clear. John Arrowsmith, who also owned land in the area, decided to capitalize off the dead with his proposition of building a railroad to transport the corpses. Burials in the cemetery began in the year of 1835, with the register showing that free blacks, slaves, and whites were interred into the Bayou St. John Cemetery, despite the common practice of the time desperate each group by their race. In 1844, the cemetery had been filled, and by 1880, it had disappeared from existence, along with Aerosmith's railroad. To this very day, neither have yet to be rediscovered. While most cemeteries have ghosts, the Bayou St. John Cemetery is a rarity, as it is a ghost until itself, but a beautiful place to visit indeed. That information was brought to you by NolaGhost.com. Held along the banks of Bayou St. John are the very thing that helped to create her legend. The Voodoo Queen would visit the northern section of Carondelet Canal, a secluded area on the bayou. There, she and the faithful would sing, make offerings, and dance under the moonlight. Although it's tough to say considering that Bayou St. John Cemetery is a bit of a mystery, it's believed that Marie Laveau might have practiced her faith in the same area in which John Aerosmith had built his railroad for the dead. Voodoo aligns itself with the Catholic calendar for celebrations in New Orleans voodoo. Calendar marks June 24th as the Feast of St. John. Voodoo priestesses and priests alike hold cemeteries on the eve before the St. John feast. At Bayou St. John's Magnolia Bridge, just in front of the Cabrini High School, an annual event is held for St. John's Eve head-washing ceremony, to which all are welcome to join. Free of charge, it is a head-washing ceremony and is a form of voodoo baptism and cleansing. Those who participate are asked to wear white and white headscarf. People should also bring an offering for Marie Laveau, which has dishes, hair ribbons, blue and white candles, flowers, grigori bags, rosaries, and saints' medals. It celebrates the birthday of St. John the Baptist and is considered at the time of summer solstice, where the sun is perceived as stopping in the heavens and turning around, symbolizing renewal and rebirth, said voodoo priestess Sally Ann Glassman. She continues on to say, "We honor Marie Laveau and her spirit 150 years later after death, and she is still very active in New Orleans, and people still go to her for help and healing and empowerment. I think it's very important for people to experience voodoo ceremonies firsthand and to realize that it's not the terrifying evil practice that is portrayed in TV and in films, books. It's actually a beautiful thing, and we in New Orleans can be very proud of it." Blessings to Sally Ann Glassman, someone who I adore very dearly and look up to. Her shop in New Orleans Healing Center is an entire center for farmers markets, art, restaurants, performance venues, and her own shop as well. Her Botanica, Island of Salvation Botanica, is located within the Healing Center. The community will be very involved in the New Orleans Voodoo Day in New Orleans, the second annual. And we remember Marie Laveau's words, "If your motives are untrue, then the living death calls your name, then there is nothing you can do." Very special thanks to NewOrleansHistorical.org, GhostCityTours.com, and thank you for all of you for joining me again with the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast. With this very beautiful cemetery edition, one of my favorite subjects to cover, and there's plenty more throughout the state and throughout the South that I will make future episodes of. Thank you again for subscribing and checking this out, and I hope you enjoyed yourselves. Once again, I am your host, Ryan McKern. Until we meet again, mon ami, au revoir.